Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Sitting in a Car. I'm Sarah Sproul, and I sit in a car and answer parents' questions about sex. We are all in the business of raising confident and caring young people who respect themselves and the people around them, right? Okay, so the question for this week is, how do I deal with these conversations around his younger sibling? He usually asks questions around her. I usually dismiss the conversation. So most of you, if you've seen me talk, will know that I believe there is no such thing as an age inappropriate question, which means that any question our children ask us, we can answer in a way that helps them. It gives them more information. It keeps the channel of communication open between us about conversations to do with sex, puberty, bodies, relationships, consent, all that stuff. So when your son is asking you a question, just know that you are doing an awesome job because he obviously feels confident enough and trusts you enough to come out with these questions. So nicely done. You are worried though about your younger child, and you don't say how old that child is. You might have heard me tell the story many times, and I'm going to tell it again, that when I was 9 years old, I was standing under an avocado tree with my friend Libby. And my friend Libby started talking about how babies are made. And she was telling me that the sperm would go to the egg and how that sperm got into that egg and what the penis did and what the vagina did. And I was very surprised. And she said, why? What did you think happened to make new humans? And I said, well, I just thought the seed flew through the air. So obviously my family must have been calling sperm seeds, because I knew of other seeds like grass seeds that they flew through the air. My brain just decided that that's how the seed got to the human egg. Now, later in life, a few years ago, I said to my mum, I told her that story about me and Libby, and I said to her, why didn't you talk to us about how human reproduction happens? And she said, Sarah, when you were 6 and I was pregnant with your brother Tim, you were full of questions and you asked me every question and I answered them all. And I was like, really? Well then, how come 3 years later I had no understanding of how conception happened? And it's now, in retrospect, I realize that conversations about anything to do with bodies and sex have to be layered. It's a constant, ongoing conversation. And while I was 6, I was having those conversations because Mum was pregnant, so it was sort of prompting my questions. But once Tim was born, I didn't have any more questions, and the conversations stopped or were paused in our family. So think about that story when you're in, I presume you're in the car or somewhere where your son is maybe sitting next to you here. He's 11 and 12, because this question comes from a parent workshop that I did for school-age kids that are 11 and 12. So he'll be there in the front seat with you, and you will have a younger sibling in the back. And you don't say exactly what questions he asks, but I would suggest to you that if you remember the 6-year-old Sarah who had heard these things but went in one ear and out the other, possibly because it wasn't relevant to me, or I sort of wanted to know but I didn't really care that much, or whatever it was, that information doesn't stick. And for the majority of young children, questions or conversations they overhear, they don't really stick until it's important for them. So that's one way you can cope with this, by reminding yourself that information that children, it's above their head, tends not to go in. The other thing you could do is just distract your child in the car with maybe the phone. If you have some game that your child likes to play and they don't get to play it very often, if your older child asks you a question, you can give your phone back to the younger child and say, you get some game time while I talk to your brother about interesting things. You could say that. You could explain to your son your concerns about your younger child. Now, because they're probably going to pick up on something anyway. He's probably noticed that you shut the conversation down. And I think I remember additional information for this question was that when this parent tries to start the conversation when they're inside and there's no one else around, the son isn't really interested in having it. He's busy, he's distracted, he wants to do other things. So that's why it's super important that if these conversations are initiated by your child in the car, that you make the most of those opportunities. And the other thing I would say is that it is possible to answer quite complicated questions with very simple answers. And if you've been in one of my workshops, you will know that I demonstrate how we can answer complicated questions very simply. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say a question has arisen because something came on the news, maybe about sexual assault. And your son, your 12-year-old, might ask you, what is sexual assault? And you've got a younger child in the back. So you can describe sexual assault very simply by starting off with an understanding about how bad things happen in everyday life. Because children know about bad things happening in everyday life. So you could say, well, have you ever seen someone or had the experience of being hurt in the playground by someone else? And your child will probably say yes. And they may even tell you the story of seeing Johnny get pushed over by Robbie in the playground and how hard that was and who cried and all that sort of thing. Or maybe your older child has a story about something that happened while they were playing sport and someone got physically hurt because someone else didn't follow the rules. So that's your in to talk about sexual assault. And you'll go, yeah, like in the world, we all try and be kind to other people and treat them with respect, but sometimes, either by mistake or on purpose, people hurt each other. And there are a few different ways we can hurt each other. We can hurt each other with our words by saying something unkind. We can hurt each other sort of physically by pushing or hitting or doing something like that with a weapon, or we can hurt each other with our private parts. And you might not know about that, but that's called sexual assault. And in fact, if you said that answer to your 12-year-old and you had maybe a 6-year-old in the back, that would be okay. And even if the 6-year-old was listening, that's an age-appropriate conversation to have. It's age-appropriate. But 6 to 9 years old children are well able to understand simple explanations about sexual assault. So that was the answer to the question. How do I deal with these conversations around his younger sibling? He usually asks questions around her. I usually dismiss the conversation. And that's Sitting in a Car for another week, where I've answered a question to help you raise your confident and caring young person who respects themselves and the people around them. Bye for now.